Pandemic. Bad.
He's got a point. Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trump. Bad.
Okay. Yeah. He's got a point. Ha!
2020. Bad.
I like that. So relatable. Bad year.
Remember the forest fires? He's funny. This is funny.
2017. Bad.
What?
As overdone as the joke is, it's absolutely true. 2020 was just a disaster of a year. But it wasn't the first bad year ever. 1871 was a pretty bad one. And like, half the years in the 30s were pretty awful too. You know, because of the Dust Bowl. And 2017 was pretty bad also. Not for everybody, just for me. You see, 2017 was not my year. I was starting to finish up high school and was having a lot of questions thrown my way, like, which school do you want to become indebted to, and what do you want to spend the rest of your life doing? You know, standard questions for a 17-year-old to answer. The problem was, I had no idea what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. These questions and building academic pressures all started to really add up and scare me. I was caught in a weird transitional period between being a child and being an adult, and I felt like I was being pushed towards being an adult sooner than I wanted. My concerns for the future manifested themselves as a form of existential dread, which eventually transformed into a general apathy. Stuff that I used to love no longer interested me. I stopped sleeping, I stopped communicating, I became incredibly gaunt. It was a pretty dark time for me. But there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Each day that brought me closer to adulthood also brought me closer to the release of my most anticipated game, Breath of the Wild. I wasn't always a Zelda fan. I think my first exposure to the characters was in Brawl when I was like 11. By the time I was 13, I had managed to get my hands on the Minish Cap through very legal and non-emulator related means, which resulted in me absolutely falling in love with the series. There was just something so intensely special about these games. The world was vibrant and happy and filled to the brim with heroism, grandeur, and adventure. All of these things were reflected in every aspect of the games, from the visuals to the soundtrack and even to the stories themselves. Each game in the series carried their own unique art styles and themes. The games were fantastic, and I took every opportunity that I could to play them. Around a year after I discovered the series, Nintendo announced something huge. They announced that a new Zelda game was being developed, and showed it off at E3 2014. This video convinced me to go out and buy a Wii U in preparation for its release in 2015, and boy did I drop the ball on that one. The game kept getting pushed further and further back year after year. I tried to fill the triangle-shaped hole in my heart by playing as many of the Zelda games as I could, but all it did was get me more and more excited for the game's eventual release on March 3rd, 2017. This was a time when I needed the game the most. Between the stresses of school, relationships, and the future, I desperately needed an escape into a hopeful and vibrant world filled with heroism and triumph, which wasn't at all what I was greeted with. The world of Breath of the Wild was depressing. The triumphant and grandiose music of past Zelda games was replaced with these meek, fragmented piano motifs that felt like mere shadows of the powerful songs they once were. The world itself felt devoid of life, and the few structures that hinted towards any form of civilization lay in ruins, slowly being reclaimed by nature. As the story progressed, I realized that this was a world characterized by failure. The world felt empty and lifeless because the game took place in a post-apocalyptic timeline where the good had lost. And the game felt sad and lonely. And I was pissed. This game was supposed to be my escape from everything that the real world was making me feel, and yet it was making me feel all the exact same things. It felt just as lonely and hollow as the real world did at that time. But I kept playing. I had waited almost 4 years for this game to come out, and I'd bought an entire console just to play it. I wasn't going to just drop it. In an attempt to try and make Breath of the Wild feel like past titles, I made it my personal mission to visit every shrine in order to unlock the Tunic of the Wild, so I could at least look like the classic Link I remembered. This forced me to sink hours into the game, searching every nook and cranny of the vast new Hyrule for shrines. There were long periods where I would just traverse across the map with no bombastic music or action to distract me. Just the ambient sounds of the world, accompanied by the occasional somber piano theme. These extensive breaks from distraction allowed me time to not only take in the scenery, but to breathe and think. And in that process, I gradually began to see the beauty of the world. Yeah, the new Hyrule lacked other characters, considering that most of them died, but that didn't mean that it was devoid of life. Animals of all sorts could be found roaming across the land. Sure, the ruined remains of civilization were depressing, but there was a certain beauty to them in how nature continued to grow through and around these structures. Not to mention that the landscape itself was just incredible. The more I played the game, the more I began to see the beauty in what I once saw as sad. This world that was once characterized by failure and decay now seemed hopeful and beautiful. The longer I played, the more I began to appreciate the world that surrounded me. And I mean that in both ways. I originally was so upset with the game because it reflected the sadness and failure that I saw in my own life, but its newfound beauty forced me to reevaluate my worldview. I slowly began to realize that maybe there was more hope in my life than I'd previously considered. Because of my attempts to get the hero's tunic and the large amount of time I spent exploring the map, when I did eventually complete the game, I was awarded with the secret ending, an ending which has Link and Zelda beginning the reconstruction of Hyrule, an ending which embodies hopefulness for the future, and I'd be lying if I said seeing this at the time didn't make me emotional. So, did this game cure me of my depression? No, I remained sad until I figured out what I wanted to do in life, but that's not the point. The game didn't fix anything, but allowed me to recognize the inherent beauty in life and that there is hope for the future. It pushed me to get out of my apathetic haze and actively pursue something that I would want to do for the rest of my life. And I did. Plus, it would be stupid to say that the game magically cured me of my sadness. That's not how that works. Regardless, the game did push me to begin that process. Breath of the Wild altered my worldview and reminded me that hope and beauty can be found even in the most dire of times. And that's why it'll forever be one of my favorite games.
Get off the stage!
Fragmented piano motifs that felt like mere shadows of they spit everywhere. Why do I write such long sentences?